In an earlier video, we talked about the role-playing games that Cubicle 7 makes set in the Warhammer settings. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the Gilead System, which is the core setting out of the Wrath and Glory 40k role-playing game. The Gilead System is located next to the Cicatrix Maledictum in the Imperium Nihilus, so this background is pretty up to date with the current events in the overall story. It's referred to as the Forsaken System, as it's now cut off from the rest of the Imperium and try and work out what happens next. The setting is covered in brief in the core rulebook for Wrath and Glory, but they go into a lot more detail in the Forsaken System Player's Guide. What I really like about this setting is how it's self-enclosed. No one is getting in or out of this system, so everyone there just has to get on with it. This makes it a great setting for games of Kill Team, whether that's a one-off game with narrative elements or an extended campaign where you and your friends determine the fate of the Gilead System. There are 6 main planets in the system, covering a wide range of backdrops. Avacaris is a forge world run by the Mechanicus. Netherus is a volcanic death world with giant insects held in check by the Knights of House Acasta. Ostia is an agri-world, supplying most of the system with food. Enoch is a shrine world run by the Ecclesiarchy. Gilead Prime is a classic hive world with the majority of the populace of the system. Finally, Cardion is an ocean world, where the majority of the Prometheums keep everything running as refined. While those are the core worlds, there is a lot more in the system. Cardion marks the border between the Imperial worlds and what is known as the Reach. Within the core worlds, the various factions of the Imperium struggle for influence and the limited resources that remain. In this video, I'm only going to look at the factions you can make a kill team for, so we aren't going to see the Inquisition or the Ecclesiarchy, among others. The Administratum are the heart of the Imperium. It's their responsibility to keep order and bureaucracy functioning. A key part of that are the issuing of the tithes. These are the amounts each planet must set aside as taxes for the greater Imperium. There is no contact with Terra, however, and some factions are beginning to wonder whether the tithes will be better off suspended to give the system the resources it needs to survive the current crisis. Such talk, of course, is heresy, and it's up to the Adeptus Arbites to remind those individuals of the Lex Imperialis. I've looked into info on painting miniatures for the machine cults of Avarkus, and all the images seem to just stick with the classic Mars style, which is fine, as that's how all my models are already painted. The arrival of the warp storms give the Mechanicum the typical excuse they need to immediately skip the techno-heresy and dabble in forbidden lore and Xenos artifacts to try solve the problem. So you can happily have your cogboys fighting any other faction at any point in time. It's all in the name of the Messiah, after all. With so much heresy, the Sisters of Battle of the Order of the Sanctified Shield will be extra vigilant to make sure the Imperium forces remain pure, by fire and sword if needed. Although the shield on the symbol is dark blue, art depicting the Order of the Sanctified Shield typically use the classic black and red style, with this picture here being of the Canoness herself. Not only are the Sisters happy to purge the heretic and the unclean, but they're also willing to do that to any of these new Primera Space Marines should they step out of line. So there's plenty of opportunity for Imperial infighting. The Space Marine chapter based out of the system are the Absolvers. Their armor is white with black shoulder plate trim and the Aquila on the chest in red. They are Codex compliant of an unknown founding. Their chapter symbol is a red chalice with a white Aquila. They have quite a cool story. Their high command has been cut off from the main body of Space Marines in the Gilead system and hasn't been heard of for a few years. So currently the chapter is led by Brevet Captain Akahir. Since the current kill teams are Primaris based, your operatives will have been part of the reinforcements that came to Gilead as part of the Veronius fleet. If you already have Space Marines painted up in your favorite chapter, they could easily be a small group that accompany that fleet. Presumably there's also an active Death Watch kill team somewhere in the system. Jaquel Veronius is an ambitious rogue trader. After the Great Rift cut off the system, there was a lot of panic as people tried to work out what was happening. 4 months ago, the Veronius flotilla arrived, ships packed with supplies and relief that pulled the system back from the brink. More importantly, Veronius brought leadership, declaring himself the new ruler of the system. While he has been hailed as a savior, not everything is as it seems. Although it is known that he received a distress call sent from the chapter command of the Absolvers, Veronius has kept the details of it to himself. There are also rumors of him dealing with some of the Xenos in the system. For Kill Team, you can play the Navy Breachers or the Starstriders either as part of the Veronius dynasty or part of the flotilla. There definitely is more going on with Veronius, and even if there wasn't, he is a rogue trader who has claimed the system for his own, which will have pissed a lot of people off. The Gilead Gravediggers are an amalgamation of all the Imperial Guard troops stationed in the Gilead system. Pictures of them match the Cadian-style armor, so the Karskrin models are perfect. The Det Corps veteran guardsmen are maybe a little more distinct, but the Gravediggers also have an affinity for the humble entrenching tool, so you could definitely work with that. You could even go for some head swaps and use a new Cadian frame to get a distinct look, or maybe make the veterans from scratch. Images I've found of the troopers have had a wide range of colours, presumably matching the terrain they're fighting in. But this particular one, of grey and khaki, seems to be the official colours for Gravediggers. Alternatively, just go whatever troops you have, and have them as part of a small detachment from the flotilla. The head of the Astra Militarum is Lord Governor Flylamon, who has placed the system under military rule, with her as the ruling monarch. Unsurprisingly, that caused a lot of friction with the other factions at the time, and with Veronius when he won up to her claim. Of course, the Imperium aren't the only inhabitants of the system. A number of Xenos exist on the fringes of the system in what is called the Reach. The orcs in the system typically are found in ships and wrecks in the asteroid belts. The majority of those discovered seem to be of the Blood Axe faction, which works well for us, as the orc kill team is a squad of commandos. The orcs in the system are currently roaming bands that lack any real sense of unity and purpose. Although, should a Git ever take the notion and crump enough of the Humies to convince the lads that there could be a good fight, then that could get dangerous real fast. The Eldar are primarily represented by Corsairs of the Emerald Princess. The Corsair Voids Guard are of course perfect for this, but those raiders could just as easily be the Green Steel Drukhari off doing their own thing. There is even mention of a Drukhari cabal of the Bloodied Claw, led by a Baron Cask. Craft World Eldar can be found within the system. Indeed, there is an entire Craft World hidden in there, but as we don't have rules for a Craft World kill team, that's less concern. Harlequins, of course, go wherever they want. There are no reports of Necrons in the system, but as Caphias Kane once pointed out, that's often due to the lack of witnesses they leave than an actual absence. If there are Necrons in the system, they're likely part of the Neferek dynasty, noted for its ruler's ability to turn into a being of pure golden light, and also being completely insane. If you want your Necrons as Neferek, there are a few different approaches, but they all have gold in them, whether that's just some extra gold details like on the shoulders and faces, or go crazy with gold everywhere, that's up to you. Next up we have the Genestealer cult. Where the Imperium goes, so too will you find the Rotten Core. Whether these are freedom fighters rising up against the tyranny of the Imperium, or bloodthirsty Xenos, again is up to you. The Wrath and Glory books don't have a write-up on the Cult of the Giving Claw, but they do have some quotes from members of it. So it could be the only one in system, or there could be one of many. Given the system's location, it's likely this will be ahead of Hive Fleet Ouroboros. Rather than the classic Hive Fleet Hydra, purple and blue, Ouroboros goes for a blue and black instead. If you picked up Into the Dark, you'll have a Kroot kin band. Although their homeworld is all the way across the other side, the Kroot can actually be found anywhere in the galaxy. Commonly hired as mercenaries, it's even possible that they're part of the Veronius flotilla. Veronius is certainly not above dealing with Xenos when it suits his needs. Tau, on the other hand, are a stretch. Their great empire is just a blip in the greater Imperium, and there's basically no chance of them making it all the way across. Now, if you're dead set on getting some Tau in, you could lift the background from this system and move it over to another one. The great thing about Cubicle 7 material is they've done all of the work for you, but you can take all that work and make it your own by changing it to suit your own needs. As the Tau Empire is relatively well documented, you should be able to pick a system on the edge of the most recent expansion and set your games there. Just as I'm working on this video, I find Cubicle 7 have a new book out that I've yet to get my hands on. It's mostly a bestiary, but does have some sections of the Gilead system, including a few named war bosses for the orcs, lots more detail on the various Eldari factions, 3 more Genestealer cults spread across the system, a new Necron dynasty which has 2 rival lords in the Gilead system. This book even includes a Tau hunter cadre in an experimental ship which ended up stranded in the Gilead system and is trying to get back home. Chaos, of course, is always going to be featured. The Cicatrix Maledictum is a giant tear into warp space, and of course, wherever humanity goes, it brings its dark shadow with it. There are 4 Chaos kill teams. The Legionary and Blooded could be devoted to any of the 4 powers. The Getterpox Infected are more of a manifestation of the Warp than anything else, but are probably close to a Nurgle Warband, while the Warp Coven are distinctly Tzeentch. Within the system, the primary Chaos power is Chaos Lord Malequence, who, although going for somewhat of a Nurgle look in this picture, is actually a Dark Apostle, originally from the Wordbearers. He has managed to locate and secure a teleportarium device, allowing him to send troops anywhere in the system he should desire. So that's 21 kill teams in total, all with a few extra background elements tying them into the overall story of the Gilead system. I think that's really cool. If you're thinking miraculously having every faction does seem like a bit of a stretch, you're not wrong. The idea with these role-playing games is to take a few of these elements and focus on those. So if you don't have any Xenos or Chaos players, for example, you can put all of that aside and focus on the internal conflicts of the Imperium. The idea here is to add a little bit of flavor to help the games come to life as a story. In addition to the kill teams, we can build out the story of the battle zones. If you're like me, you'll have a stash of scenery from various editions across multiple games. Luckily, Gilead has a place for all of those, so rather than try to build out a new set of scenery to match whatever the battle zone of the day is, you can take the scenery you already have and work out where in the Gilead system that best fits. If you have Mechanicus terrain, then the Forge World of Avrakis is perfect. Of course, you can have Mechanicum style scenery on any Imperial world, especially in small amounts. It could be a Mechanicum outpost, or even as just a small part of the normal Imperial infrastructure. But if you've got a lot of Mechanicus scenery, and especially if you've got an ad mech kill team, then the Forge World works well. Next up is the Fronteras terrain. The idea behind this is an Imperial base in a newly explored planet, but it also works really well for the processing locations on an agri world. So this would be where the silos of grain are stored and are ready for liftoff. The more classical Imperial terrain with those Gothic arches works well for a shrine world like Enoch, especially if you've got a lot of statues like in Discord's piece. Of course, this scenery works really for any Imperial city and can be good to mix and match with the other scenery types. For Gilead Prime, the hive world of a system, Necromunda terrain is perfect. There are a lot of different options for Necromunda. You can have that 2D style with the big walls and the presumed ceiling, so very like the Into Dark terrain. Or you can add in the stairs and start using those levels. There's also a new line of scenery with the Ash Wastes, showing what it's like outside the hives. These sets of buildings on stilts with lots of walkways that could be a lot of fun to play a kill team game on. Nethris is the death world in the system. It's a volcanic planet with giant insects, which are kept in check by the giant walking machines, the Knights of House Acasta. For this, pretty much any terrain works well, as long as you've got some sort of volcanic mat to go along with it. Last up, we have the Space Hulks in the outer parts of the system. The Into the Dark terrain is obviously perfect for this. What we can do is add a little bit more background, so you're not just landing on any old Space Hulk, but a specific one. Cubicle 7 have a book devoted to Space Hulks called Redacted Records. This lists 5 Hulks within the Gilead system, along with lots of flavor details for generating your own Hulks. Now, the definition of what a Space Hulk is might vary. Some only consider the truly gargantuan masses of hundreds of ships that slip in and out of the warp as true Space Hulks, while others would consider a single dead starship a Space Hulk. While Gilead doesn't have any of the massive variety, it does have a good mix of everything below, and each has its own story. The Gilead system also has a few surprises, including an entire craft world, a frozen world full of ancient artifacts, and a plague world on a massive orbit around the system. Lots of potential for some epic stories. The goal of this channel is always to make the most enjoyable 2-player game that we can out of these GW skirmish games. We've already got some locations and factions, so we can have a bit of extra colour. To bring that to life a little more, you can introduce a patron and a reason for a battle. In this example, we've got one of the Gilead Inquisitors tasking their agents with securing an object from one of the Space Hulks. For some people, that won't make much of a difference, and they'll just want to get playing and rolling dice. But for many, I think sitting down to a game where you get a message from an Inquisitor asking you to take your squad of Absolvers, led by Invictor Braham, to secure the Liber Servitium on the Space Hulk Compostela before Lord Malequence can get his agents to secure it, just makes for a far more interesting game. Hopefully you enjoyed that. As I talked about in the early video, if you want to get really stuck into the background for the Warhammer games, looking into role-playing games is a great way to go, even if you have no intention of actually playing the role-playing game. For Kill Team in particular, you're looking at an entire galaxy of history and lore. It can end up a little overwhelming. The Gilead approach of narrowing that down to a single system brings the whole thing into focus, and can be a great addition to the overall experience. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Each week I put up a new video talking about one of Games Workshop's specialist games. The goal is always to try and make the best possible two-player experience. If this is something you'd find interesting, please subscribe to the channel and comment to let me know what you'd like to see in future.